All right, guys. I think Jason's not going to be here, and Nat is obviously going to roll in a little bit late. So, let's see. Thursday morning, 8:04 a.m., January 4th, call this meeting of the Capital Program Committee to order. Present this morning are ex officio Libby Gibson, Richard Hussey, Peter Kaiser, Nat Lowe's anticipated to be here a little bit later, myself, Peter McHecker, and Christy Kickham, and Jason Bridges is stuck off island. Get a motion to adopt the agenda, please.
So moved.
Okay, that's accepted. I'd like to get a motion to hold the minutes of December. Let me back up here a second. We got a couple things going on with the minutes. So get a motion to accept December 7th and December 14th.
So moved.
Second. Okay, that carries unanimously. To hold December 13th and 19th for review and revisions, which we all get a chance to review.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that carries unanimously. And December 6th, I'd like to have someone give me a motion to amend the minutes. There's one item I just wanted to have Terry insert, please. Terry has a copy of this. The text would read, it's the text of page 3, just for the record, December 6th, and to read, instead of cost approximately $155 per square foot, to read cost versus approximately $155 per square foot for similar police marine building. And that's discussion we had on the airport equipment storage. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Seconded?
Second.
Okay, so that's approved. Great. There's no one here from the public to comment. I'm hoping we'll have a relatively quick morning, but we still got a quick bit to get through. We're going to start with a review of outstanding items and issues. And I think for the purposes where we are in the process at this point, we'll do that right along with our review of the summary worksheet with rankings, which at this point is the open requests, and resolve them at one time, so that what will happen is I'll provide the clarifications on some clarifications of the information we reviewed at the last meeting and a couple other open matters, which I followed up on these, and then address each request, closing it out with a motion and a vote up or down, or if we do a revision to an ask amount or whatever it is we decide to do. So these are not in a particular order. I thought they were, but I didn't do a sort, I guess, last night before I printed this.
So just to review, what are the outstanding items?
So the outstanding items, we have outstanding information and we have open requests. So I'm just going to roll them together and get through a list of, there's
is it
8.
There's 8. Okay. I had 4. Can you just run through them real quick?
Yep. We have Sparks Ave sidewalk, open information. Four Corners, there was information required for clarification. Sparks Ave rehab, there's information required for clarification. That's the sewer. Playgrounds, we were looking for additional information. That's open. Central office, we were looking for additional information. That's open. Tank maintenance, I wanted to put in the record that we made updates to information. Town water to plant, house, and staffing, there's some additional information. And we also have the airport here about the temporary hold room. And then we have our report to move on to. So again, these aren't in a particular order, but transportation, Sparks Ave sidewalk. Yes, sir.
Could I ask maybe that Tom could go first? That way they could get on with their day.
Actually, that's fine. Thank you, Peter. I was thinking we'd do them last. Because Jason, if he were to be here, had to leave at 9 a.m. for a Comcast license renewal meeting, but he's not here, so we have time. So if you all want to pop up and do the airport. Okay, so just to set the stage for Tom here, where we left this is we were in support of the request. This was the airport's number 1 on their list. And my understanding is that we needed to get a final on the dollar number. And Tom, if you want to proceed, and then we can ask any questions.
Yeah, we just received the breakdown yesterday. It should be in your pack there, $830,000. We do believe that that's still quite high, and we know there's some items in there that we can review. We have a conference call this afternoon with our engineers for programming. I would suggest at this point we go with the 830, but our intention is to bring it in much lower than that. Because, quite frankly, 830 is too much for a structure.
Sorry.
Yep. No, understood.
We can come back to you as soon as we get any more updates to what we're going to do.
Well, I think at this point, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom or Brian, but this was one, it's your number one request. Two, we're going to have to make a recommendation up or down, and presumably with some kind of a dollar number. So I want to be able to pin that down. At the same time, we have a little bit of time. We have maybe our final report isn't going to be printed for a final review here for another week, although a draft is already in circulation. And then the other thing is I understood that if this doesn't get funded from, just in terms of urgency and how it goes through the capital process, if this, correct me if I'm wrong, if this doesn't go through the SIP and borrowing, you were going to fund it out of the fuel revolver?
That's yes.
Okay, so so there are avenues if it doesn't make it through the SIP, I guess is where I'm going with this. I don't know what to do with it. It's such a large number that look, let me back up. The airport staff, it's professional staff, they're doing their due diligence, they've hired a consulting engineer, they've given us a number. You're also working under the airport commission that reviews these things in much finer detail than we do. I don't want to get into micromanaging. On the other hand, it's just such a huge number for a temporary building that I'm a little uncertain on how to handle it. So I'm throwing up a bunch of information in hopes that maybe, Libby, you could give us a little bit of help, or Tom.
Just, is it better called a seasonal building instead of temporary? Temporary to me means you put it up once and take it down. This is annual.
It is going to be, we have to call it a seasonal building because that will also make it eligible for future funding through our PSCs.
For the operational aspect of up and down?
Yeah.
Okay.
But also for, again, to reimburse ourselves through another funding source.
And what do you think the dollar number, when you mentioned, Tom, that you could take some costs out and there are things you think are too, I guess what I'd like to know is what's your bare bones number that we can review?
I'm guessing it's between $650 and $700.
Okay. Peter?
Does that include the fake dog hydrant?
Yeah. Oh, in the drum.
That whole
best line I've
area
ever
is
seen.
coming out. At this point in time, it's a notice of proposed rulemaking. We're not required, but it looks like we will be in the future. But once they require it, then it becomes eligible for funding. So we're going to put that aside for now. We'll design it, but we won't install it. So.
Okay.
Benches and other stuff. Other stuff.
Other
yes, I
stuff.
like it.
Yeah,
Stuff.
benches and other stuff. Yeah.
And so, Tom, how does the airport feel about, the airport commission feel about maybe getting a number approved that at this point in the process, so that we can all move on, and then if you guys need to fine tune it, we can revisit it. When do you think you'll have any different change or a refinement?
Hopefully by early next week we'll have another update on this.
Okay.
Again, just some of the things that you're looking at where, we looked at too. Benches, we can supply the benches.
Right.
Do they need a full-blown system at the gate? They're manual systems, so we
Okay.
believe we can make some significant cuts here.
So does $600,000, would a $600,000 SIP, subject to still having potential to review and make a change next week before our final, when you have more information, cover the need, the ask?
I would say 650.
650, okay. So I think from an operational standpoint, you guys, we got a lot of other stuff to do. This is still kind of variable. We do appreciate the fact that you presented the information and what the details are, but we also understand you're going to need to do some refinement. So I think for the purposes of our discussion, we're looking at a $650,000 number. And unless anyone has specific questions for Tom on the proposal, I suggest that we move along on this request. Okay.
Okay, and we'll get back to you as soon as we have any changes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, so on this request, I guess what I'd like to see is if we can get if there's discussion amongst ourselves, if there's not further discussion, a motion, and any discussion on the motion and a vote, please. Get it? I know it's early.
I'll move acceptance.
Okay.
One second.
We have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Could I ask a question? Is that the 650?
650, yep.
So you're accepting 650,000?
Yeah, and we can always revise that. We meet again before a final. Okay.
I don't have marketing.
All right, guys. Sparks Ave. Where we left the Sparks Ave sidewalk was, bear with me, I'm cross-referencing.
I'm good.
We held it to add additional information and vote today. And I met with Michael Burns, our transportation. You okay?
Yeah.
Okay, you got these heavy sighs. I don't know.
It's just.
I don't know if it's like a precursor to a
Already
heart attack,
started.
God forbid, or if there's something going on. Okay, so I met with Michael Burns, our transportation planner. I just, I want to reiterate, because he asked me to, this is the highest priority category, work for this particular category for the department and the NP and EDC, Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission. So a quick run through the description, just to give everyone, because that was one of the questions we had, is that there's two aspects to this. Sparks Ave sidewalk improvement and another area that's also sidewalk and bicycle improvements. So one is to replace and widen sidewalks and accessible curb ramps on the south side of the road to connect existing sidewalks and create a complete sidewalk network between Atlantic Ave and number 36 Sparks, which is Nantucket Auto Body. Includes shared bike lanes, connects bicyclists and pedestrians, points west, the New Mill Hill Park area and the path that's going to go in there, the Cottage Hospital, the high school athletic fields, Lower Pleasant Street Business District, and the surrounding neighborhoods. And of course, if you can go west, you can go east. The other area is reconstruction of existing sidewalks with new concrete sidewalks, accessible curb ramps, and crosswalks on the south side of the road from Hooper Farm to Old South Road. This connection between the rotary and the roundabout has been determined to greatly improve walkability in that area for the Lower Pleasant Business District and the surrounding neighborhoods. And there's also transit stops. And it's a connector to the Sconset and the Old South Road bike paths. So that's the scope of the work. The dollar numbers, I guess, is where we're also focused. And it's a slightly over $1 million ask. In total. However, the request is for just under $650 because this is slated for $400K funding under the Complete Streets program, and it's actually in the queue for Complete Streets. And there's some uncertainty as how any of that will be affected if it's pulled from the queue. So I guess, in other words, is we're not sure how that's going to affect that apple cart. I guess I have just a general comment, and that is that I've been thinking about this in some other requests, and I think as a matter of policy and procedure, it's something we owe it to ourselves to be kind of looking at least to identify and consider, which is if a request demonstrates some sufficiency of need, putting it off a year increase our costs, and increase our costs by construction escalation, and increase our costs by the compounding of principal and interest that results as the increase in the construction escalation. And we have the fiscal capacity. If we have the fiscal capacity for the current year, the question becomes, why would we put it off? It just seems if it's required, it should be funded. If a necessity has been determined, is the discussion I believe that we should have at some point, and I bring it up because I think it's applicable to this one. The other aspect of that is I do understand, and this relates to other requests we've had in front of us, is that if there's a request with issues, if there's something that's underlying some type of a deficiency, either within the request or that caused the request, We have to consider that too in an attempt to address it. But they're really separate and parallel tracks. And I don't want to, we've already voted the water tank maintenance. I'm not looking to change votes or anything, but I started thinking about it in that context, and it came up in context of the Sparks Ave, in the context of maybe even the central office edition. And again, I'm not voting on these. I've decided for this year just to abstain. I think was the proper thing to do at the time, and I'm not going to switch midstream, even though all my questions have been answered, and I'm very comfortable with it. The point is just simply this. I think that we have a responsibility to, if a request has need and we have funding, to make a recommendation unless if the request isn't a demonstrated need, then it should be put to an out year. This is what I'm putting forth to you for discussion. I'm not saying, I'm kind of tipping my hat in terms of what I feel, but then again, if there's something that's underlying a deficiency, we should be addressing it, but we should be addressing it separately. Voting no on a recommendation, which is to put it to an out year, I'm not going to repeat myself, it increases the cost, but it also doesn't accomplish what we might want to do if there is a deficiency, and that is to get a hold of the proper commission through some additional motion or some additional action to be informing them very specifically of what the concern is. And I think the reason we would want to be doing that is because we don't want to be repeating issues by saying, okay, we're going to we recommend funding this request, but we think there's a deficiency. We'd be remiss if we didn't also say you need to address the deficiency. But again, I think that they're separate but parallel things. So I wanted to put that out there for you guys to consider. I don't think the Sparks Ave sidewalk has a deficiency, but the two concepts were related. Anyways, if there's thoughts on that comment or thoughts on the Sparks Ave sidewalk, please.
One thought on the comment?
Peter, yep.
So how do you define demonstrated need? Is that as seen by the department head that's putting forth not in regards to this
Sure, yeah,
recommendation, but
general.
just in general? I mean, I thought we were trying to identify what were demonstrated needs and the information we're given, so.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it comes down to what the process we've undertaken, which is where we've reviewed the request with the department head through their presentation. They've given us the information which we processed and determined a ranking on. The ranking is a process where we take individually and then as a group all of the criteria that are under the FP&P for prioritization and ranking, and we give it a number, which is a ranking of relative importance. So if, for instance, a request comes in, I don't have the ranking of relative importance for some of these, if you use a specific, but if a rank comes in, if we're going to measure these relative to one another, and we've made a recommendation to proceed with funding or have town meeting authorize X, Y, and Z, and they're ranked 55, I mean, I think a reasonable argument can be made that anything that's over a 55 could also fall into that category. So that's one way of doing it. And then, of course, the other way is that it's an imminent threat or it's a legal requirement. So it's kind of a general response.
Yeah, a little bit, I guess, with regards to this, since this is their first priority, you would, presume that they foresee it as a demonstrated need.
On this specific one, yes. And then I think the other part that we didn't get into this year, but we are going to get into, which is risk. And risk involves the metrics of cost, deliverability, and operations and management capacity to handle the request. With respect to cost, we have a grant of 40%, which is, in this instance, $400,000.
Yeah, we could lose.
Which I'm not suggesting we would lose it.
Is unknown.
But Michael could not give me an answer, when pressed, how that would affect everything in the prioritization list too.
Did Mike Burns tell you whether they received the revised beta evaluation for the grant? Because the first time around they got denied. This was one of the reasons why county administration
Yeah.
pushed it off.
I met with him after our last meeting, so it would have been after you gotten any information from him, and he told me that this was anticipated to be funded first with the 400K from, now I understand the Complete Streets is actually going to be, FY18, it was more money than 400,000, but I don't want to muddle it. So yes, his understanding is that it is funded $400,000. It's number one on the Complete Streets list that's been processed. So.
There you go, there's the kit, that's fine.
So I guess that's a lot of different information that we're looking at because it's related. We are looking at, it was brought up under the context of a particular request. But I think the best thing to do might just be to address the request. And then if we want to have discussion on points of consideration for when we recommend something and if there's a deficiency, how we address it, we could have that as a separate discussion. So is there, the Sparks Ave was held for additional information for a vote today. And the question at this point is there discussion? Is there a motion?
Motion to recommend it.
For clarification, how much are we recommending? Is it still the number from last week, or is
The
there an updated number?
request is $650,000.
Wait a minute, Brian's got something. Hold on.
Brian?
I just have a question.
Yep.
I mean, because I'm
Please.
just curious. There's only $400,000 grant. We're going to have to authorize the full $1 million, and I have no idea where we're getting $1 million from, to be quite honest with you. I mean,
Isn't this part of the 14-9 article holder?
no, this isn't
Not.
part of Old South Road. This
Okay,
is,
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
no.
Okay.
So there's $600,000 that the town's going to have to
Everything
come up
else
with
is in there
that
except
we
for
don't
that.
have. I don't know where it's coming from.
Okay. So
So, I mean, we have the capacity to do what we recommended doing between capital exclusions and everything. Adding another $600,000 or $1 million because we don't even know if we have the grant yet throws everything into chaos in terms of our recommendations and funding. I don't want to speak for the town manager, but I'm not entirely sure where I'm finding $600,000.
okay, so I'm gonna make a couple suggestions because this puts, I think fundamentally from an operating position, I don't care what the request is. If it's a request we all love individually, subjectively, or we all hate individually, subjectively, but needs to be done. I'm not talking about Sparks Ave here. I'm talking about the process. We're kind of in a position where I believe that we should be reconciling. We're relying on you all for dollar numbers and how we fund our recommendations. That's part
Right.
of what your role is with respect to this group. So we're kind of in a position where scheduling, because you've already made recommendations, it is what it is. I'm not finding fault. I'm just saying we need to look at this because we're kind of boxed in. If we decide that we think this is a recommendation, then we're forced to try and carve it out of, as a practical matter, other things that you've recommended so that we can find the money. For instance, and I'm not suggesting we do this, but I'm just saying, Old South Road. Some of that work is scheduled, much of that work is budgeted under $15 million. Of course, it's actually almost $100,000 less. So there's $100,000 of the $650,000 we need. But much of that work is budgeted with 5 fiscal years out with escalator clauses, which we may never need. But we do have a need for a project this year versus built-in escalator clauses in later years. So I'm not suggesting that we take money from one or the other, Nat. Don't get caught up in that. I'm just simply saying.
Trying to follow it all.
I'm just simply saying is we're kind of boxed in with some of these. Some of these we're funding for 5 years out, and this one it's ready to go this year, but we don't have the funds for it.
There you go.
And-
Hold that. That's
and
the
I think-
best thing right
But
now.
but we don't have the funds because it's a procedural matter.
Yeah.
It's not that we don't have the funds. So I just wanted to identify that.
I mean, oh my God. Steve, can I ask
Please.
Brian a question? Brian, I don't know about chaos, that's correct, but I don't understand how the whole thing works enough to even make a comment. All I'm saying, what Steve just said just then was actually the meat and potatoes thing. We're going to have an article for $14.9 million just as a placeholder. We have each one of those items is going to go out to bid. He didn't say that, but he said it in a different way. That prices are going to come in different, just like the sewer did, just like everything does, just like this fire station thing. So you're saying that this particular little project, minus the 400, which is part of the other funding weird stuff that goes on with the state, the timing of this is off for us. Is that what you're saying? As far as the borrowing?
I'm saying that the recommendations for the
I mean,
capital
Libby,
items
what am
that
I
we...
saying wrong? What do we just throw this away?
It's not a timing thing. It's that we didn't factor this project into our funding recommendation.
Well, that's what I mean, timing of funding. That's what I meant.
Okay,
That's what I
but
meant.
when you're saying, it sounds like what you're saying is sort of factored into the Old South Road Corridor project. That's not how it's going to work, because the Old South Road Corridor project has nothing to do with the Sparks Avenue
okay.
sidewalk. So I think what we would have to end up with, if this project is recommended, is an additional debt exclusion authorization for it, or cut something else out.
We should do the first thing because we've got the 400,000 thing. It's sort of like listening to the airport manager talk about grant stuff.
Well,
and
if we have
all
the
that.
400,000
I
thing,
haven't,
I'm
I have
hearing
not received
something.
any notification
I'm
about the
hearing
400.
something
Okay,
different here.
so can I make a suggestion? I just want to clarify. I brought up
Mike said Complete Streets is funding this, right? Part of it?
400,000. But this is the thing, okay, so
Potentially.
potentially.
Right.
So I brought up a bunch of different things because they're all relevant, so that they were there. I think really what this boils down to is a procedural matter and some reconciliation. And Brian and I just met yesterday. We discussed some open matters, and we discussed some necessary reconciliation between our recommendations and what numbers are on paper and what number the requests were, just to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. I think this is an opportunity where we might say to Mike, or this project doesn't. I suggest the process doesn't have to be so rigid that we can't go to whomever put this in, which is Mike, the Department of Transportation, DPW, and say, look, this is the total amount that we budgeted for this type of work for the year, in terms of the town management and finance. And we'd like to do it all, but you do have these things in the Old South that are 4 or 5 fiscal years out. They're based on designs that aren't even 25% designs yet. And they've got construction escalators built in that would equate to probably between a certain amount of money and a certain amount of money that could go towards this project. Can we take some off? Can we take some off?
Can I make a comment to that?
Yes,
because
please.
I think we're marrying two things together. The only way that any of that money that is part of that 14.9, 15 million, whatever we want to call it, okay, would be eligible to be used is if this was part of the authorization at town meeting for a borrowing and then a subsequent ballot vote. If this is not included in the language for that article, okay, for Old South Road Corridor, then I can't use that funding.
Wait, I'm confused.
To go to
No, I'm not suggesting putting them together.
right, but just reducing the estimates for what's in the out years in the borrowing for Old South does not give me any additional money today to use for anything else. All it would do is if projects came in less or we didn't do them, we would have borrowing capacity for that project that we would ultimately rescind if we weren't going to use it. It doesn't give me any flexibility today for any other projects because that money doesn't exist if the townspeople don't approve it.
Well, but that's the case for any request.
But you're saying if you push some of this out, or there's construction estimates for a ways, so we have funding for this. We don't have any funding for that if it's not included in the article for Old South Road.
This is okay. Let's clarify a few things because this is getting, I think, unnecessarily muddled, and I think it's just a matter of communication, which is 90% of the battle. One, does the town have the fiscal capacity to fund this project or not?
Currently, we've not put it forward, so I would say
that's not the question.
If we did a borrowing, yes, but we haven't proposed that.
Thank you. Now, the Old South Road is a borrowing, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So all I'm saying, and this would be a borrowing, correct? Or it could be a capital exclusion, but it could be one or the other. All I was suggesting is that we consider is if a department has put forward a request that this is their number one. I don't care if this doesn't get done. Jason brought it up. I mean, I do care, but I'm not arguing for my own sentiment here. I'm trying to facilitate the process. Jason brought this up as an important aspect of what the Board of Selectmen were doing. He's not here, so I'm taking that to heart and I'm trying to process it. Okay, that's part of it. What we're looking at is, we have one thing that we have town manager has recommended for whatever reason, which we respect, not to borrow funds for, not to get an authorization to borrow funds for. We have another road work improvement thing, which is basically the same thing, where the town manager and the finance department, for whatever reason, which is totally legitimate, has recommended a borrowing. All I'm saying is, why not discuss with the respective department taking some of that borrowing capacity for something that isn't going to happen for 5 years and having it put on this project? So we're not changing the total borrowing capacity. We're just simply rearranging the priorities. That's all I'm asking, is if
But
that
it
can
has
be
to be
done.
in the article.
Well,
No,
they're separate articles now. I don't wanna get
What
it
he's saying
confused.
is reduce the 15 million to, say, 14 million and ask for 2 separate borrowing authorizations.
Right, so just like any other road work project that we would put in, it would be under its own article. The Old South Road is the Old South Road. It's really the Old South milestone corridor. I'm not suggesting we muddle projects into that. I'm simply saying we have more than sufficient borrowing capacity there, because we don't even know that we need all that borrowing capacity. Can we, if subject to the department's involvement, because we're not here making decisions for them, we're here to help prioritize and facilitate, can we see if we can get some of the borrowing capacity over there? It's clearly a massive priority for them. That's what I'm asking.
We could recommend that, and we'll have to get it through the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. And I tend to agree that all of these numerous Old South Road projects, over time, we may find that they're either not needed at all because something else happened that negated the need for it, or the cost has changed or whatever, and we may need to go back and get more money anyway, or not use it all anyway. So if the thinking is to reduce the Old South number to accommodate the Sparks number, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a
That's what I
separate
was
article. We'd have,
suggesting.
okay. I mean, we can look at doing
As
that.
long as people I'm gonna have to get it through the Board of Selectmen, because they're the ones who were saying we need to get the Old South Road number up front.
Right, and wait, hold on one second,
Yeah.
and then I want to finish the thought. There are some other projects where there may be differences in numbers that, through a reconciliation, we hatch out, and we decide, and we determine, oh gee, here's $100,000 of borrowing capacity that, for a different project, that we could put towards this. Like, there may be other things. I'm looking at numbers here, and I'm seeing some potential for 50,000 here, 100,000 there, that it might mean that this Old South would only come down $300,000. Now, it's currently, we're discussing it as 15 million for rounding, but it's actually 14.9. So there's $100,000 right there towards the 650. You know what? Let's leave well enough alone. What I'm suggesting we consider through you, which you seem to be supporting the concept, is that we could recommend it, and if so, we would have to work as a team together, including with the department and the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom, to figure out where to get the money from, is what I'm suggesting.
Well, maybe what we can do, or you can do in your report, is sort of explain this a little bit and say that, and we're happy to support it too, that because the Sparks Ave project is deemed important and has a grant funding offset potential, that and in order to keep borrowing somewhat in check, because I have heard concerns from my board about the amount of borrowing that we're talking about for these capital projects, that we're recommending that, the way we've just talked about it, reduce Old South a little and incorporate Sparks.
And I understand that, I appreciate you suggesting that, and I think that, just to say it, it also speaks to credibility and accountability. We've got an ask for Old South Road, we've got an ask for other projects that aren't going to be delivered soon, some of them, some aspects, where this is a project that would be delivered much sooner and have a really big impact on people's lives, and people in the community who are the taxpayers and the voters get a chance to see it and say, oh, our capital is working for us. So I'm trying to keep that in mind too, because it's not just this year in the Old South Road. We've got hundreds of millions of dollars of capital coming over the next 10 years. So anyways, Peter,
Just,
Ned, I'm sorry.
no. look, everything that Libby just said is good, I think, agree with that. Now that we've got to this, how to shuffle the cards. But this project, what started all the questions, maybe, I don't want to say I did, but the Sparks part to the Nantucket auto body was like old. That's been around for a while, jiggling that, fixing it, widening it, fixing that old sidewalk that's like 2 feet wide now, okay? The new part that's been added to it was the new, sort of bumped it up to in over $1 million. That was really the only question as far as how did this all happen? What was the reasoning behind it? You know what I'm trying to say? How they got linked into each other, because they're kind of separate, but together at the same time. So I look at this as a improvement to the original idea, figuring out a way to make this new tip thing. This complete streets thing is just another tip. It's just gobbledygook with the state, same as the tip, confusing. We probably have to pay for engineering. They pay for something. I don't know how it even works. It's brand new in the last year or two. So I'm fine with it. I don't think there was any controversy in doing it. This part that you're bringing up, Brian, is somewhat new in the sense of, like, I don't think any of us, did anyone know that this wasn't sort of okay to kind of just say all in favor, say aye to? I didn't. So I'm sorry about that. But, like, whatever works to get through the financial rigmarole, just to get this to work, timing-wise, it should happen. That's it. I don't think we need to get into, it is complicated to figure out your end of this stuff. There's no brick and mortar on your end. It's the craziness. So figure that out. Hopefully it can get done. I mean, that's it, really. It's timing. It's ready to go. It's good visual, like he's saying, for the schools, for that road. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's good.
We're not arguing any of that.
Yeah.
Peter?
Okay.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah. I think logistically, the project that DPW has with the sewers and in the Sparks Rotary area and all of that, that's going to come first, and it's going to obviously cut what would be a new sidewalk. I think as long as they can be done simultaneously, one after another, that's not simultaneously. I think that would be a smart.
I did speak to,
sorry.
Go ahead. I did speak to Michael. There are some cross sections where that will interact, that can be coordinated. So they are aware.
Okay.
They're all working together under this work together.
My finality of a point that I'm going to try to make is it makes sense to me when you're in an area, if you're working to finalize an area, and I think I look at the Sparks area, the Stop and Shop and all of that, that's our downtown. And I think if we can get a finalized sewer plan that works and then get the sidewalk in right simultaneously, it makes more sense, irregardless of any strategic plan that the BOS has in a project that on Old South that for me is in the future. Fix what you have first before you move on to create some new things. Mm-hmm. And that's my strategic plan.
Okay.
And I think that's where I would make a motion to approve the project in conjunction. If the $400,000 causes us angst financially, I think we have a big problem. So I would make a motion to approve the $1 million in total to make this happen.
As a separate borrow?
It should be separate.
So
With the lowering of the 4.929.
And if that comes in, that's gravy.
Okay, so can I make a suggestion on the motion? First of all, let's get a second on the motion if there's a second.
A second.
Okay. If there's discussion, I have a comment to make, but if there's anyone else who'd like to make a comment. Okay, so procedurally, I just want to point out that I think the way to go through this would be that our motion stands in and of itself. We are discussing in the backdrop a reconciliation of how this is going to happen, which we're going to discuss some of those aspects in any event in order for me to finalize a report. So we can discuss that more. We've already kind of laid the groundwork. We're going to borrow less here somewhere and borrow more for this. So that's the backdrop. The recommendation is to fund the request And the ask, now, let's just be clear on the dollar numbers here. And Brian, I need your input on this clearly, because there's some finance stuff involved here. The total is at 1,000,008. We don't need to do dollars and cents here for our recommendation, but the total is, $1,090,000. 400 comes from, is anticipated to come from the complete street, so that leaves approximately 690. I just wanted to say that for clarification purposes. And then the question I have for you, we're still discussing the motion, is I'm just curious, how does that get presented for this particular article, or however you guys decide to do it? It's like any other ask. It's the full amount, and then we make a notation that we anticipate funding from something else, or how do we do that?
Okay, so Article 10, the article itself simply says to see what monies the town will vote to appropriate for capital projects for fiscal 19. And then the Finance Committee motion lists all of the projects and their funding sources. So this one, Spark Sidewalk, or whatever we're calling it, will say something like, this project to be funded through contingent upon debt exclusion, which has obviously requires subsequent voter approval, of $1 million. And if indeed there is a grant that has been approved by the state, and we have that in writing, then we can say something like $1 million expected to be offset by a state grant. But if it isn't confirmed like that,
Then we don't put it in there.
we could, what we would do is say something like cost may be offset by potential state
Yeah, I
grant,
like
something
that.
like that. And that's what we've done with airport projects.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we were all clear on that. That's
And I
okay.
think that might be more of a PR thing with town meeting, to say that the grant, we're expecting this grant
Right.
in the explanation, if it comes up,
Right.
of
And it's
that
not,
project.
it's not without basis. It's just we
Right.
can't say for certain if we don't know for certain.
Well, exactly.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Okay, guys, so we have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that carries unanimously. Okay, so we got that done. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to go from my list here because Four Corners mini roundabout. There's just some clarifications to this. This matter was voted as and approved. Spoke again to Michael. There's Libby, this is really for you because I don't know if you, I know there was some discussion and Nat had brought up, but there's little, if any, school land required due to the newer design and the property that's available in that area.
To the right side.
Yeah, and if any, it'll be a small bit for a sidewalk, but still alternate plans can make the sidewalk work without having the school land. So the FY19 funding is to get a finalized design, determines what, if any, other open matters exist, and to get the project moving, anticipating construction in construction ask in FY21. And there is a, just so you guys know, I don't expect anyone to remember, Mike will remind us, the construction cost could be, a good portion of the construction cost could be borne from federal and or state monies, just so you're aware. It's not relevant to this year's request in so much as they're not asking for construction funding, but I just wanted to let you know.
So what he's saying is it could be in the tip queue.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just so you're aware of it. Okay, so that one's addressed.
We had previously recommended that, right?
Yes, that was just I'm kind of marrying our outstanding matters and our other stuff just to kind of go through the list I have.
Just to
because-
point out, someone still needs to talk to the school about this, regardless of whether any land is needed from them or not,
No.
because my understanding previously from them was that they were not in favor of it. And
Yeah.
now, subsequently, I've heard, they are in favor of it now. But I haven't heard that from the superintendent, so I guess I need to ask him about it.
We retired
Okay,
that.
yeah, and I wasn't suggesting that, my report supplants any of
No,
that.
no, I got it. Yep.
I just wanted to let you know what
We just
Michael
need to be
had
on the
said.
same page with them, is all.
Yeah, and it sounds like everybody's heading in the same direction, and maybe some of the school committee changes have. It seems like it's going in a good direction. So that's nice. That's a super high visibility investment, and I think it'll go a long way for the town in many ways. Christie?
Are they at all involved in the design?
The school?
Yeah.
Not if it's not their land. But not to suggest, there is a public hearing process.
Or their input? Just
Yeah,
curious.
there is a public hearing
The
process.
school crossing stuff and some
And
of that.
they'll have an opportunity to weigh in just like anyone else,
Yeah.
and maybe with a little
Well,
more
they,
weight. than
they need
that.
to be brought into it, because if it's going to require more crossing guards or whatever, then
Thank
they're
you.
going to need to factor that into the,
Operationally,
right.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so, good. Okay, hey, why don't we segue right into the school? Playgrounds and field improvements. We had pulled this, we held this for additional information and to vote today. The question was whether there's a mechanism to fund it all in FY19. Finance has looked into this, and they're not optimistic about making changes, despite the potential cost savings due to other factors. So I think where this is going to go is, I would suggest that we would address what's on the table in front of us, and then there be some further discussion with the school, maybe just to see if it's something, if it is authorized, if they decide that they want to just do it next year and combine the work for the cost savings. In reflection, the reason I think part of it was being asked for this year is because it's site-related work, and the site-related work they were going to do in conjunction with other work they're doing on building foundations for utilities, accessory building, that is separately funded, previously authorized, and to leverage the mobilization factor and decrease costs. So that's why they kind of separated it into 2 years. I don't think it hurts to ask them if it's something they would consider doing next year, but I don't think that it affects our recommendation. We can vote. I think at this point we vote on what we have, and it's like the airport. If we decide that if we get additional information, then we have one last tiny little nibble at the apple before we ink our final report on the 10th. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So if there's no discussion, then I'd ask for a motion, and we can go from there.
Move to recommend.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? And the vote?
Aye.
Okay, so that carries unanimously. Okay. We're getting there, guys. Sewer Sparks Ave. This is a clarification. I reviewed with David Gray, our sewer director, some questions I had about sewer. One was this matter. Actually, I had gone to him about the L8. I had a bunch of questions about that. He was able to provide me detailed maps and information, which was very helpful. But as a result of that discussion, we got into some other discussion. And one of those is the Sparks Ave rehab. So there's a clarification there. The request for this is not $500K, which is in our books currently. It's actually $250K. And that number is based on the SHMO dollar numbers and the recent CC construction estimates for similar work that was provided to Wanna-Comment. And then the other thing just to mention with respect to this is that if the L8 feeder work is done, it absorbs this cost and this work. It will be part of that project. So this would be monies that, although they were authorized, are not required.
Sounds like Sparks Ave.
So I just wanted to let you suggest. So then I guess the question is, well, we can deal with this in reconciliation. We don't need to deal with it now. There's no additional action required on that.
Can I ask you a question about that sewer thing then?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
So if it's included in the L8 number for sewer, why did he submit a separate number?
What he had said.
Because it needs to be done anyway?
It needs to be done. If the L8 gets tied up, the feeling was they're putting guys there cleaning out the lines from fog, fats, oils, and grease.
Yep.
It needs to get done.
Yeah, okay. So if L8 doesn't happen, this still needs to happen, and that's the reason for the number.
Yeah, and then the number could be adjusted, but again, we can make the recommendation, and we can do an adjustment in the reconciliation when we meet to finalize the whole packet and the funding sources, if that's okay. Okay. So again, this was this is not up for a revote. I just wanted to mention it to you guys so you knew what was going on. The next one is, forgive me for jumping around here. I'm going to stick to sewer, and then we're going to go back to the school. Town water to staff and plant, town water to plant and staff housing. I had a question about this because I was pretty unclear on some of it. And there appears to be a miscommunication in addition to that somewhere along the line. So there's not actually, and I just want to be clear, there's not actually an alternate solution proposed at this point. However, there was a cost adjustment proposed in the request. So the cost adjustment, this is the rundown. The ask is, as opposed to $1 million, is between $500,000 and $700,000, which is, David admits, a little bit wide. The reduction was in part because the DPW and the Wanacomment are going to do an in-house design for the water line when or if it is installed. So this is informational. The scope of the work, it's approximately, it's about 2,500 feet up South Shore Road to Zachary Way. That's where the town water ends.
Okay.
And then it addresses the water quality issues and the legal, there's not a compliance order. This isn't like the CMOM, but there is law that he's trying to observe. No one has, dropped a dime on the town on this. Sorry.
Could be a nickel.
And it also feeds not just the facility, but there's 4 units of employee housing just before the facility. And then insofar as work on the facility grounds, what they're going to do is just tie into the well line that feeds the buildings now. That's already plumbed. They're just going to disconnect that portion from the well, not necessarily abandon the well.
One well feeds all the buildings?
One well feeds all the buildings so that it will.
That's a very good idea.
So that it'll service everything. So again, this is just information. I don't know where to go with it. I know it's not in our in the town manager finance department recommendation.
That should just happen.
But it did seem like it was relevant because you seem to think that there was an alternate solution.
No,
And I just wanted to point out
I
what
thought what got brought up. I think what you said at the beginning was what we heard, that they have this in, but it may not. It may just happen, something to do with the water company or something. Anyway,
right.
So this sounds like what you just said. It makes it even smarter.
So
I didn't know about the town housing not having one well. But in those places, I didn't know that. That's good. So that means it's easy to tie it into town water.
Well, it's easy, but it costs money because we got to get the line there. And then the reason I brought it up was so that we all had the same information. Miscommunications happen. There's a lot of information being transferred around right now. And then Libby, I didn't mean to surprise you with this, but we weren't able. This is like on my list of things to talk to you about. So I don't know if it changes your position or not in terms of recommendation. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I just wanted to bring it up.
Well, it probably would. I had understood that there was some other way around $1 million extension of a line. So it sounds like it is needed, but it won't be $1 million. It'll be something less than that.
David
Isn't
thought
there
between
fire
5 and
protection?
7 and closer to 5.
Wasn't the part of it fire protection down there would happen by just the water company's normal expansion of fire protection?
Oh, you mean
Tap
in terms of hydrants and stuff?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
You know what?
I think that might have
yeah,
had something to do with it.
Well,
but
they're
I'm not 100%
involved.
sure.
I'm not positive, but I do know that part of the cost savings is by involving the water company and the design and the implementation. So anything that's required of the water service for a standard main supply would be included in it. And Rob McNeil and the DPW are involved too. So Nat, I'm saying I think yes, but I don't know specifically.
I think we would support changing the supporting the project, but with a reduced number.
Okay, so I don't know how to handle it. He said between 5 and 7. Do we compromise it? I don't want to be casual about these numbers either. It's just that they're not. We don't have even a 25% design, so it's hard to say what the number should be.
Why don't we say 6 for now?
Okay, I was going to say that.
But I'll confirm with him that he's going to need a more complete breakdown.
Okay, so
$6.
$6.52. So, with that discussion having been had, I guess the question is for this: do we have a motion to reconsider and approve the request at $600,000.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that carries unanimously. And again, that's going to be a reconciliation matter, but it's sewer enterprise, so general obligations. Bear with me, guys.
The next one on the list was JDB paving. I had a question. I mean, I think we did it. I'm just looking at my notes, how I had this.
Okay, let's,
I don't know.
I thought you said two
One
more
list.
things.
Is it just two
Central
more?
office and water common.
Oh, back on that? Okay.
I have, okay, again, I said I'm jumping around, and I apologize. We have left to discuss specifically the central office edition.
Oh, okay. Peter's thing.
I have a clarification on the tank maintenance.
Yeah.
Nice now.
We talked about the town water, that's done and approved. And then we can move on to the next item on the agenda. And that we can address your question.
I don't care about it.
Okay.
I'm just looking at how I wrote it from the last
Okay,
meeting,
I
which
gotcha.
seems like a month ago now.
Okay.
Voted in
So-
favor then.
We
So-
did? Okay.
Just amounts,
We
yeah.
did? Okay.
Yeah.
So unless anyone else sees items, we have two items still outstanding. One is an update on the tank maintenance, and one is the central office edition. These are both Peter items, so. Do you have a preference which one we tackle first, my friends?
Let's do an alpha sort.
By department or project? Okay, let's do central office edition. So the clarification on this is that, well, let's get an update. We had held this for additional information and a vote on the recommendation today. The request is, I got a clarification, and our concerns were two-part. Well, actually, our concerns were three-part. I think one of them is proper planning prevents piss poor performance, which is really 5 Ps, because piss poor is one word. And whether this was one of those things or not. What I've been able to determine is that it wasn't one of those things, or maybe it was, but it's not going to be said that it was. The other part was whether this centralizes all the administrative staff in one location, which it does. And thirdly, whether the building is part of the school's long-term plan, which is to say, is this building going to stay there?
Yeah.
And it is. So those were the three things that we had on the table. And again, we didn't vote on it. We wanted to get that information and then discuss it. Is there any discussion?
I just asked Peter a question. The reason I changed my mind on this and am currently opposed to doing it is because when the school was built, it was built with the notion that office space would be allocated to some of the
Correct.
areas that are being relocated in this project. Does this change your mind?
I guess there was a couple things that I was against, and one of those was, my thought was the way it was presented, it was more than just admin staff coming together in one central location. So that I don't have any problem with now. I don't mind the fact that admin staff should be in one space, but I do have a problem with that being the space. Putting good money into a so-so building, I'm totally against, especially when we as a committee and the town voted on a project where we thought we had ample space in NES, and I saw some of the commentary that was sent out to us as committee members in regards to, well, we may have potential space constraints. To me, it's still not worthy enough to be putting good money into a bad building. Tongue-in-cheek, I'd love to ask, I know we had 2 trailers. One went out to the sewer plant. Where'd the other trailer go?
It's out there now.
They're both there? Yeah. Maybe it'd be fun to put the admin staff in a trailer like they put our kids for a bunch of years. That would be, see if they like that physical location. If I retract that comment, that was a bad comment. I still look at, if you have space available in an existing building for that entire complex of admin people, you should utilize what you have and then address that problem later. You're not giving away the building. The building still will sit there in its existing condition. But I think there are bigger fish to fry in our capital budget. Where that, from a priority standpoint, for me, is probably at the very bottom.
Okay. And then just to address, just for a point of clarification, my understanding was that the may have space constraints relates to the increase in the number of school children, and that's where they're considering that they're trying to plan in advance. Although they didn't plan this in advance, they're trying to plan in advance for having additional kids in the school where the staff are currently located in the main facilities, in the bigger buildings, so that this would open up, pre-planning and doing this construction work would open up that space for additional enrollments. And that's just a point of clarification. This has been...
For potential new enrollments.
Well, based on their whatever the studies they've done. Mike brought in their enrollment.
Yeah, that study was done, what, 3 years ago? So...
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not.
It wasn't part of the plan then.
Yeah.
I don't know what's changed.
I'm not trying to facilitate an outcome. I'm just trying to facilitate the information, and then you guys can make a determination how you want to do it.
Because in reality, you're looking at the admin staff for special services. So the way I look at it, you would have, what, 2 people or 3 people max coming over.
It was I think it was approximately 650 or 700 square feet for personnel, and then the conference room for all the personnel to have a place to meet. When we met in Michael's office, which actually is a little neater than mine, but there's still quite a few stacks everywhere. Do they need it? I'm not going to manage the department's requests in that regard. Like, it was presented, it went through the process, it got a ranking. We have to make a determination as a group. So, is there any further discussion? Okay, motion?
Just a comment.
Yeah.
I'm torn because I understand what Peter's saying, and we should somewhat adhere to what the original plan was, because that's how everything's based, and we make our judgments. But the school's asking for some sort of alteration to accommodate how they want to finalize their final plan, and it's just hard for me to sort of counter that a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I'm torn a little bit. I understand. I'm sure there's, I can't think of any examples, but I'm sure there's some things in the past that we've planned on and it didn't work out that way. And, we had to secondarily make the adjustment. And, but, I'm a little torn.
Okay. Thank you. Point well taken.
Yep.
And Richard?
I'm torn as well.
Yeah.
I'm torn as well. This group, the school group, is one of the all-stars in this whole process in terms of how they organize and present. So it's difficult. I don't know.
To me, sorry, Richard. To me, it's like moving a dirt pile 3 times and it arrived back in the original place. I think it's not well thought out, not planned correctly. It should have been part of the original plan. It's not. It's new. For me, it's a knee-jerk reaction. To put money into a bad building, I mean, it's central to the campus, yes. But if the thought process was well thought out, it would be part of an existing building now, period.
Okay, do we have
Instead
a
of-
motion on the floor?
No, I think we might have more
That's my
discussion.
thought.
So I think, Nat, you said that, I just, again, this is for information.
Building
purposes.
itself is solid
Yeah.
underneath. But I think what Peter doesn't mean bad building like rotting.
Structurally. Okay, I just want to be
Means
clear
bad
on what we were
building
talking about.
to
No, if you thought it out correctly, you would have
Yeah.
included it as part of one of either the new school or the addition we put on CPS. We did all of the move-outs from the high school, which provided space for this department, ironically, and now you want to continue to move out. Well, why wasn't that thought out in advance?
Yeah.
I think it's misuse of money when you can't think of a plan and you had all your numbers in front of you. That, to me, it's just, for me, an excuse to spend money to get on another project. when the need from my standpoint is not there, and that is massive micromanagement.
So, acknowledging the massive micromanagement, I think there's a couple things I'd like to just quickly comment on. One is, I think it's important, and I appreciate the fact, I think we all appreciate the fact, and that's one of the things we're struggling with here, is that we try to operate on a consensus basis. We try to, have discussion and work together and come up with a decision or a recommendation that we're all in favor of. And sometimes we can't. And I think in this instance, it may be the case, one way or the other. And but at the same time, we're it's a professional. We're operating professionally. It's not a petty thing. We respect Peter's input just like we respect anyone else's. But there may be countervailing. There may or may not be countervailing things that outweigh that perspective. And I think it's important for us that we operate that way, whether we support a member's recommendation or on board with that, an individual's recommendation or not. So I want to have said that. And then I think the other thing is that there's part of this that goes back to if there's a need and it's demonstrated, do we address deficiencies separately and in a parallel manner? And by that I mean, if this were not recommended because it was poor planning, but there still is a need, and the request is going to keep coming back and they're going to need it and it's just going to cost us more money, are we as a town better served to address the authorization, but also address where we see there's a deficiency? Because, look, we want to, part of our role, and I know it's just part of our role, is to be identifying deficiencies and shortcomings and weaknesses and trying to address them on a request-by-request basis, but also in an institutional manner going forward. So we're all learning from the process. And what I mean by that is if a request, if we have an issue with a recommendation, but we support it, the funds for town meeting, we still may have other issues that we need to address, but those could take another route, which would be a formal memo from the committee saying, I don't want to use this as an example because we're talking about it, but like water tank maintenance. We have a very discrete concern about some of those aspects. That question will come up shortly, but I'm using it as an example to kind of take the focus off of this building and the personal aspects of it, if there are any. Do we not recommend it and it costs us more money? Or do we recommend it and we do separately in parallel a memo to the water commissioners and the department stating our concerns that we're asking that they not be repeated, we ask that they be addressed, and that they become part of the process. So I'm just suggesting that there may be different ways to approach this other than just, well, one person or two people feel a certain way, and others are a little bit torn. There may be a way to accomplish both goals. So I'm putting it out there. Yep. Peter and then Christie.
So what I would recommend that I do, since I was on that building committee originally, is go and meet with Michael and Diane, because there was another aspect of use of space within NES that I still haven't heard talked about, where we were told and they were going to allocate pre-K classrooms for the future. Well, that hasn't come about. So for me, there's other space that was being allocated that hasn't been used. So once again, I want to go and meet with Michael and ask specifically, let's take a walk. Let's go through the building. Because there's another use of space that's not being used. For me, there's got to be some openings. I want to find out.
For administrators?
Yeah.
Over on the elementary side, you're talking about.
Yeah, at NES. We were told that the NES, because we're taking out classes 5, 4, and 3, which equals a lot of classrooms disappearing to put into the new building, and that space that was freed up would be used by admin, pre-K, community school, and other potential occupants. So I really don't know what the other occupants are and how many spaces they have. So why don't I go and walk with Michael and he can take me through? Because I just look at, once again, we spent $47 million, and if we screw it up and we have to add on to an admin building, not even a year after that project got its CO. Yeah. I mean, how stupid is that?
Yeah, and I mean, I want to say I try
That's
not to.
frustrating.
Yeah.
That means we didn't do our due diligence.
And I would just like to say, as a member of the committee, as opposed to the facilitator as chair, is that I completely support Peter in this. I just think it's like, wait a minute, you guys planned so well, and you dropped the ball on this, and like this is kind of crazy. This is like, it's like a pimple on the ass. Excuse me, but it's not. It's just not right. However, that's part of where I am with it. Anyways,
All right,
so
Christie had a comment.
where are we, Christy? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
I
okay.
apologize.
Well, I agree that there certainly should be some accountability.
Yeah.
I love that four corners roundabout would be nice.
Yeah.
But no,
Trade?
actually, I do have a
Little quid
question.
pro
I have a
quo.
question through you to Peter.
Yeah, please.
Peter, do you have any issue with the idea of that being the central office, or is it based on like that location being central office? Do you think central office should be more dispersed, or?
No, I think that based on the plan that we bought into was that the central office was going to be part of NES, and there would be no need for that building over there, which could free up space for what? Maybe more parking or something else down the road. Not to add on. Not to add on.
So you're
Okay.
talking about
I can answer that.
of getting rid of that area for structures versus, kind of keeping it going. I wasn't looking at it like that. I was looking at it as, outside of all the stuff you said about NES, that footprint of that area and the condition of the two buildings that are left, other than, I'm talking about not about the new ones, the old ones. I was looking at this as like, well, they're saying the building's pretty good, we could kind of do this. They don't plan on dumping that building for whatever it would be housing later. Like, that's how I sort of saw it. Sort of similar to this wood shop addition, kind of, but not exactly like this. But, well, we can use it and we can do this instead. Are they breathing life into it for the future that they just haven't told us?
Well, as part of that discussion,
That could be part of it.
part of
I
that
just don't
discussion
know that.
with us as a group was if they ever needed to build another building,
That's a
there would
spot.
be a middle school. CPS would be developed and NES would take over that whole structure. And if they needed to, they'd have to
Yeah.
build a new one. And I look at that as land where you would go. Why spend money, and then potentially
I thought the
do
middle
away
school
with
plan
it.
was the baseball field.
Yeah, I think there's some
I
confusion.
mean, I'm just saying, that's what they...
Yeah, but with more buildings, you need more parking based on
Yeah.
code.
Well, according to the rankings,
What does it say?
I think there's some.
I don't even know. Where are we?
I think there's some confusion between. I don't want to get the topics confused here. So whether 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, we need to build another building, I think we need to be planning in advance, but we're certainly not there. Peter did mention something about the keeping the admin in the newer building, and what Michael had said was that what they're using is they're trying to consolidate and keep the pre-K and expand the pre-K. There's been a change in plan, and it is to consolidate and keep the pre-K in one space and close together, and part of that involves moving these few staff over and then moving them over by, as we've been discussing, having a conference room space and updating the structure. I think it's a sound building. There are issues with the construction. The way the HVAC system is working is not well. I don't know that necessitates a conference room and more building space, but you walk in there and you can see the condensation on the walls from the past. So I think we probably have enough information. And Christy?
no, I'll finish.
Yeah, I would just say if we, I think we need to make a determination as a group. Is this something that's needed? And if it is, are we recommending it?
Do we have a motion? Was there a motion made?
There was
There's
not.
no
So this is all just discussion.
I was just going to say, do we have any flexibility to delay this?
I don't know to what end, though.
Yeah, I know.
I do think that if we make, I would like to say, and then Richard, is if we do make a recommendation to approve, I believe that recommendation should include that there would be some just that there would be some type of a measure taken by us in terms of like accountability, a memo outlining concerns. I think they're very valid concerns, and they should be addressed, because again, we're trying to develop a system where we identify weak points, and this seems like a weak point in planning, at the very least. So we want to address that. Richard,
If we've had enough discussion, I'm ready to make a motion.
please.
I'd move that we not recommend this.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Vote.
I'm in favor.
Is it all in favor?
Of the motion, in favor of the motion.
Yeah.
I'll go on, just to get this. It's going to come back with a better plan anyway.
That isn't a bad thing.
No, I know, but no one said that yet, but that's what's going to happen.
Well, there are alternatives for the school to be funding this, so.
Oh, that's
doesn't have
another
to go.
whole story.
So let's
So
finish this.
we have a motion to
Vote.
not approve?
Yeah.
Yes.
We have a motion,
Yeah.
I'm
And
asking
second.
for a
Yeah.
vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll be opposed.
Opposed.
Yeah.
And I'm still abstained, so,
right.
okay. Thank you. I appreciate the discussion, you guys. I think it's really worthwhile. It helps to, it's good for us to.
Just a,
Yeah,
we
please.
may want to, I don't know, would it be possible to send a email and kind of why we went this way?
Well,
If
this is the other thing. I don't think yes.
I don't,
I believe
not that we should precedent and do it to everyone, but
Well, I think
I just,
that, yes.
No, I'll do exactly what I said. I will actually meet with Michael and tee it up for next year.
Well, I want to, to Christie's question, Richard said a minute ago, they are like the star
Yeah.
over there. Like they got the,
Don't define that.
all right, well,
Yeah.
they got the, in my opinion, they got the shell game going pretty good.
Okay.
This maybe be a little blip, but it's not a $47 million blip. This is sort of a
That
forgotten in the stocking. This is in the stocking. It kind of got forgotten at the bottom. I don't know.
Yeah,
but the rest of what they're doing and the way they explain the future ideas is good.
part of it also
You know,
now was a
I
change
don't
in
know.
plan. Part of it was also a
I think
change
it was
in
a
plan.
change in how they were thinking
Yeah.
in stream. I get that, and I agree, but
I think the point that Christie's trying to make, and I think it's valid, and
this area was slated for tear down. I don't think that this would be on here.
yeah.
That's, like the baseball field plan.
The point is that Christie's trying to make, and I think it rises above. If we're going to spend this much time deliberating on something, I think that we need to take. We made a recommendation. This isn't a simple, gee, you don't need a loader this year because you have one that works, and your capacity might benefit, but you don't really need it.
Well,
This is
I meant out of respect for their diligence in the
May I
past.
finish, please,
is what I
now?
meant.
this is a little bit more involved, and I think that again we should be, if we're going to deliberate something like this and we're going to come down in this way, then a simple out year is not sufficient. There should be a formal recognition to the group as to why, and maybe it starts, I would suggest, with Peter walking through as he suggested, and then we just formulate it doesn't have to be a long thing, but just a simple memo that states this was, the request was not recommended for this year based upon these considerations. Then we're very clearly communicating why it is we're not doing it, as opposed to just having it be, did they watch the TV? Did one member communicate it to them? Was the full sentiment of the committee conveyed? I just think we should do it in a it doesn't have to be a formal, but it should be a formal action. This, and I think the water tank maintenance. Peter, do we want to do that? Do we want to have Peter meet with them and walk through and get a better idea, and then we'll ask Peter maybe to put his thoughts into a little memo? You did this in the past with the school stuff. Is that acceptable to you as a volunteer?
But not for this year. I'll do it afterwards.
Not for this report.
That's correct.
But for after,
Yep,
like January,
absolutely.
February. Like we're doing it.
Probably March, April.
Okay.
To walk through.
You'll walk through March, April. Okay.
I got a real job.
Yeah, I know what that's like. Okay. Yes.
Can I take a clarification?
Who was for and who was against?
For
Hands
not,
up.
it's,
Who was
it's,
for, hands up?
it's for not recommending,
For not recommending.
yes.
Okay, and opposed
Christie's,
to that? Did you-
No, abstentions.
You abstained?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
There's
All right.
an at the end of my name.
The last item here, and then we're going to move on, is the water tank maintenance clarification. I sent you all the
I read
updated Q&A. And again, if there's any discussion or a change in perception on the recommendation, this is the time. And I'm not getting support on this, and I'm kind of miffed by it. I want to tell you right now.
Where?
I'm not getting support. We should be, if we make a recommendation on something that needs to be done, that is not to do the work, I believe it's our responsibility to be informing the responsible party as to why. If there's a deficiency, if there's a perceived deficiency, so that they can correct it, so that it's not just some ambiguous or arbitrary point. I'm not speaking about the school.
No, I know.
not.
I'm already on the water tank.
Yeah, and I mean, we understand that I'm not saying we should approve it or not approve it. I'm saying, as a procedural matter, we've identified that the epoxy is a question begging an answer, and how it was applied, and when it was applied, and who's responsible for it. The sconset, one second now, please.
no, I'm not going to say anything.
The sconset flagpole is not a great example, but it is an example, and it's kind of muddled with other things. But we approved it. I'm not using an example of approving it, but we kind of bifurcated it. We said we approve it, we made our recommendation, but we also pursued through finance that there was a liability. In that instance, it was a known liability. So we pursued it through the insurance company. In this instance, we don't know there's a liability. We suspect there's a liability. We have a perception that there's an issue. I believe, and I'm calling upon you guys to support me, that we would be letting the Water Commission know what our concern is. Because otherwise, we're just, if they do this out of retained, if they do this in a different manner, we're only doing half our job, is my concern.
Yep.
So that's my point on that.
This is like having steel cleats on a boat. Okay, I mean, this is really not complicated. Now, everything you put in those 8,000 question thing, you did. The only thing that wasn't mentioned, with not your fault, or just it's easy to overlook something, is the material.
Well, I do
Forget
have a
about the
daytime job,
epoxy part. What about the material of the bolts and the nuts
Hardware.
on the top?
Hardware.
The hardware.
The hardware.
That's what I meant. Galvanized. I mean, they use galvanized ones for like capstan things. Things that are exposed to weather. When you walk to the High Line from the steamship or vice versa, you just look at what stuff's made of. It's pretty simple. It's like some of the things I see, like those new guardrails, those wooden things that just popped up. Did you notice the steel, the raw steel that they use in those? They'll last less time than the wood. Trust me.
Yep.
So what I'm saying is, these things happen through bids, and they go unnoticed. I don't blame the water company.
Yeah, it's not.
I blame the system, but I agree with what Steve's saying. You got to find a way to correct this somehow. I don't know if it comes from us totally. I think the message from us is okay, but this is simply we're not in Arizona situation. That's why they bring all the planes out there, because they don't rust and corrode. This is a different atmosphere.
Nat, there is another.
I mean, it's really not hard in my mind.
There is another concern, and that was articulated and discussed, and I was asked to pursue at the last meeting, and then Peter, if you want to comment, which was the epoxy is failing prematurely. By the manufacturer standard, it is simply...
That covers the steel bolts.
Even not having anything to do with the steel bolts.
all right.
Other areas. So,
Okay.
So that was part of it, is that it's simply failing prematurely. And then a series of questions along the lines of trying to understand who was involved when and how. We're not doing a forensic investigation, but we wanted a general understanding so we could try and make a more informed determination, not just of whether to approve it, but what conditions we might suggest to the Water Commission, other than perhaps you're going to run for the Water Commission. So that was the
Stay where
thrust
you
of that
are.
letter. We've already voted it. I'm not bringing it up to bring it up. I brought it up to bring up the clarification. But again, I'm putting a lot of time into this, and I don't mind doing it. I volunteered willingly, but we need to do our job in full and complete.
So
And
what do
full
you
and
want
complete
from-
is we
What
should
do you
be.
want us to do? You want to,
If we're going to say no or yes, but we have a deficiency, we should be volunteering to come up with some wordage to submit to the commission expressing what our concern is.
and this is the 658 and the 303, right?
You can go first.
No, I was just,
No, it's,
the, Mark, the company was very quick to say, oh, it's your elements and it's the conditions
Like,
and the
who
salt.
cares? No big
But
deal.
did they offer that when they sold it to us?
Exactly. Amen.
You know,
I picked
and
up
that's,
on that.
and in the future, this will be a good lesson for us.
Yeah.
In any board reviewing this, but we should know what our system, our conditions are out here, and that should be a standard question,
yep, thank you, point well
Yeah.
taken.
To move our discussion to a vote, it's not that I was against the project and spending the money. We have to do this, unfortunately. We have to,
Yeah.
because we have
Already
to
done.
protect our fixed assets. It was more finding not fault in either leadership or our design team, but getting to the answer, why is it failing prematurely? And clearly, I would make a recommendation that the town never engage that company that came back with the comment that Christie just said, that, well, didn't you guys realize you were 30 miles out to sea? That's absolutely asinine.
You building one every 10 years?
So the message that I think we should deliver to Mark as the new admin or the new person in charge of want to comment is make sure you look at your specs ahead of time and make sure you're protecting our assets before we, the town, put our signature to the bottom line of a project done, because that is the failure. And there should be some contractual, potentially, arrangement where we can go back to that designer and look at what the document said. I think that's, and I look at Libby, granted, want to comment, but maybe we go to the commissioners and say, do your due diligence and make sure the contracts that were signed 5 years ago made any sort of guarantee that it was beyond a 5-year warranty on the epoxy, because that's basic contractual. Come on, how many fixed assets does Wanacom have besides tanks and underground pipes? It's not rocket science.
I was going to say the other thing is, for the water company, we've had an existing tank for a long time that we do maintenance on, and so they should, they should know what questions that they need to ask, because they have an example.
The kind of tank we had up there for 1,000 years was different than this. It was just a steel plate.
I'm not
welded thing.
Wisconsin. I
But
was
the
talking
way-
about Washington.
No, I am too.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, the kind of tank they built is different, which has these hardware issues that the other ones didn't.
I'll make a quick comment.
But it's still steel.
Yeah.
And it needs to have some kind of plan. I think I completely agree with everything you're saying. I'm
Still a
just
model
trying
to
say,
follow. Yeah.
I'm surprised that they do it this way. I mean, I really am. I mean,
Yeah.
it is kind of weird. It should be some kind of stainless or galvanized material of some kind.
I agree.
But Peter's right. It's already here now. We got to approve this maintenance simultaneously with some kind of message. Is my opinion.
Peter,
Whatever the motion would be.
Peter, one quick comment, though. I did speak with Brian about this, and Brian was intentionally involved in the chain of communication here, just because, the procurement end of it and institutionalizing our learning and so on and so forth. And we did have an extremely brief conversation on it, but about the warranty and the value of an extended warranty. This isn't a toaster that we would perhaps be buying a full value warranty on, but it's a large asset, and if there's problems in there identified as not being a deficiency, if an RFP is developed so that this is reasonably addressed to prevent a vendor-related or an applicator-related issue, then a warranty is perhaps something worthwhile, but it's all going to come down to dollars and cents. So in any event, Peter?
So question to you, Brian. Since there wasn't any recommendation from town admin on this, And if you hear, I guess what maybe I'm just making a comment that I think the committee would go along with it. We feel that we have to spend the money. Where does it come from? The money.
The 658 and the three.
Yeah.
I actually sent Mark another email because he was supposed to get back to me. It would be either they were originally anticipating asking for borrowing authorization for it, but we've asked them to work with us and review whether or not they could use retained earnings
Good.
out of the two of those to pay for that.
Good.
I'm just waiting to hear back from him on that. But my recommendation to them was if we can absorb it through retained earnings, it would be that would be what I would suggest we do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Christie?
I was just going to say, is the, I can't remember, is the repair going to be with the same product?
I think, well, okay, so this is where we get into, we have a concern,
Yeah.
we have, I believe, an obligation to be explaining that concern. So if, for instance, we made a recommendation to reconsider our vote, and we voted to approve this, out of retained earnings or otherwise, part of our motion would be that we would be following up with the commission to express our concerns. They're legitimate concerns. It's part of our role. It's literally part of our role in the FP&P.
Yeah.
So I think that we should do that if we decide to change it. Now, if we decide not to make a positive recommendation, I think I've said it pretty clearly. We should also be letting the water commissioner know what our concern is. We have a perception right now. It's not been validated, but it's based upon the manufacturer's own information that the coating is failing prematurely. It's a 10 to 15-year product. It failed in 5 to 7 years. It's that simple. Okay, so enough said. Peter?
So I would make a motion to change our original motion that we recommend approval for the projects on both tanks with the monies being funded from retained earnings from Comet, and that they come back to the commissioners with a warranty for the new work that has to at least be a 10 to 15 year solution. I'd hate to put numbers to it in years, but it has to be an epoxy that's applied that's going to last.
Can I suggest a friendly amendment?
Absolutely.
Before we vote on the motion, would be that as opposed to stating specifically a warranty, is that we're stating that they would come back with a plan to address the shortcomings in the first. It may be a warranty, it may be other. It may be that they're applying it when the guys can get housing, and it would be better if they did it in July when it's warm and dry. I mean, there may be other things. Okay. So with that motion, is there a second?
Second, that's good.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that carries unanimously. All right, I appreciate you guys working through all that with us together. It's such a great feeling to get stuff done. We're going to move quickly on to the review of the draft recommendation. Before we get into that, I just want to recap before we get kind of onto whole nother topics. Where we are schedule-wise and just getting things moving is to finalize a print version of the up and down dollar numbers for Libby later today, which is me. Tight on the heels of that is kind of a reconciliation Capcom town manager finance recommendation, so dollar amounts per request and funding sources and so on and so forth for the reports, which I discussed with Brian. And he is graciously going to make his time available. And then we have the reports. I'll mention it now, but I'll mention it in this context. I'll mention it later in the report, but I'll mention this context too. Is we've got some additional information that we'll be gathering up for the report, which is their projected impacts, amortization tables, etc., for the final version of the report, which we'll be voting on at our next meeting to submit to the Board of Selectmen and FinCom. And then we're going to be discussing at our next meeting, mapping out out year and other reviews that we didn't do yet, and just our general schedule and kind of proceedings and stuff from there. All right, so that's just kind of the lay of the land. If you have what I was going to do with the report and recommendations is just very quickly once through, go through it. It's pretty self-explanatory in a lot of regards. There's enough information to have a table of contents. Page 3 on the introduction, there's a line to be added that just basically indicates the the financial policies and procedures represent a best practice requirement of the town, and I think are necessary in part of the town to participate in and benefit from the Massachusetts Community Compact Program. The summary of capital allocations on page 4. I just did a by account and department of the totals. The DPW had sufficient categories to do a breakout. All right, and then enterprise fund accounts, same thing, just a total number by account. And then once we have the reconciliation of the dollar numbers, I'll fill in all the blanks in terms of totals and numbers of requests and so forth. I'm going to go through this, and then if you guys have questions, okay? Is that all right with you?
Sure.
So page 5, it seemed just to get a handle on this for purposes of discussion, as opposed to having selectmen or FinCom having to wade through each request if they ask us to do some type of a presentation, which I'm hoping they just accept our report and maybe we can answer a couple questions. It just seemed good to have a handle on anything that was over $1 million in a request. So that's what this page does, and it does it in such a way that the planet numbers are prominent in the left margin, and then they can cross-reference them to the detail sheet that they'll be receiving, which I'll mention in a minute. I did want to touch base, Libby, just on some of these things real quick while we have the benefit of being in a group, is titles. I see there's a couple here. The DPW garage facility we talked about changing, and at this point I've just, for the sake of the report, proposed Town of Nantucket Public Works Facility. There is the Harbor Master Building reconstruction, which I've put in as Town of Nantucket Harbor Services Building.
I wouldn't call it that. No one's
Okay.
going to know what that is.
Okay, that's why I'm bringing it up.
I would keep it Harbor Master Building.
Harbor Master Building.
What was your concern with the Harbor Master building?
It's just
Curious.
it's a public service. It's the harbor services are really what it's for. It's for, in part, the building for the harbor master, but it's also showers and restrooms and a water service for the boats and so on and so forth. So I was just trying to give it a little clearer
Yeah, I got you.
delineation.
That's what they came up in terms.
Improvement. Will you just text me that?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. So, Libby, you think just harbor master building reconstruction?
Well, I see what you're getting at, but
How about harbor master and facilities?
Or harbor. Can we deal with it in a reconciliation period?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just want to highlight these so that if there's something visceral, we can address it. 6 Fairgrounds Road area improvements. I just thought this is a much bigger project than one property location, so for now I put a line through it.
yeah, let's talk about this later too, because
Yeah.
the 2 Fairgrounds Park and Ride isn't really included in this.
Okay, so that was just from our request sheet. Okay, so we'll pick up titles and reconciliation. So what I anticipated we'd do is once we have the total, all these dollar numbers resolved, I'll put in a total. And I was thinking I'd just do these alphabetically as opposed to dollar number. I mean, it's minuscule. You guys don't need to be getting involved in that, so I'll figure that out unless someone has a strong feeling on it. Christy, I'm going to call on you just a second. Libby, there were some other titles that don't come up on this sheet, but they'll be in the others, and they relate to. One is the Old South Road corridor, and I'm just wondering if really the most accurate description is the Old South Road, Milestone Road corridor improvements, corridors. And again, we don't have to deal with it now, but it's just, there's a bunch of work that has nothing to do with Old South, so I'm going to mention it. And for the benefit of the group, if anyone wanted to make a comment. And then the other areas, the other titles, which are really 3 of them, they're the Jetties Beach Facility, the Surfside Beach Facility, and the Children's Beach Facility. And I just tried to simplify it to indicate it's infrastructure and utilities as opposed to sewer, drainage, electrical, sewer, drainage. They're all just a little bit different. So it was just, again, encapsulating the titles in a way that might that relate. We don't have to make a determination now, I just wanted to bring them up. Excuse me, page 6, funding sources. So what we're going to do there is we're going to have an Appendix A, which is a description of a typical municipal, Massachusetts municipal funding sources for capital projects. And that's for the layman, people who might pick this report up, and even for ourselves to refresh ourselves. It'll include what's a general obligation bond, the types of bonds, so you'll have the Proposition 2.5 exempt, the ones that fall, the typical that fall within 2.5, what type of vote is required for each, whether it's a town vote, majority vote, 2/3 majority of town meeting, and or a ballot vote, just so it's in there. And it's information that will have been gleaned from the Mass Finance Association and reviewed by finance before we attach it. Gee, I got a little bit of a cold coming on. The funding sources, what we're going to do here in terms of the direct appropriations, the long-term financing and the short-term financing, is we're going to break down into subcategories what the free cash amount is under direct or pay-as-you-go, the reappropriation of articles, and so on and so forth. Long-term financing will break out the debt exclusion, so 2.5%, Prop 2.5 exempt, and typical like things like the enterprise general obligation bonds funding. So just so that we're tracking funding sources across consistently from the details report after reconciliation with the town manager's recommendation to a summary view for the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom, and to live forever in a dusty server somewhere. Short-term financing will have capital exclusion, bond anticipation note, and service provision option. I just included that if we had a chance to talk about it. We don't really have time. It's not applicable. We don't have any capital-related, quote-unquote, asset that we contract out or license and lease back, which is a kind of a fiscal manipulation tool, a legal fiscal manipulation tool.
Is that according to GAAP?
Yeah. Projected impacts, debt service, we're going to break down principal and interest with the amortization tables based on, and we'll include our assumptions, what underlies using these particular tables. And that will be as opposed to any kind of graphs, I think at this point, of what the relative debt is for exempt and non-exempt. So what we're trying to do is simplify, make a meaningful presentation that's simplified, certainly at this point. And the same will be with the taxpayer and ratepayer rates. So we'll be able to include what the taxpayer rate impacts are. We may do this on a per project basis. I want to talk to Brian a little bit more about that, and how they, what town Libby and town management is looking at in terms of the level of information presented in this particular report. It may prove useful for various reasons in the process, but we'll work out that detail.
That's a good component.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I like that.
Do you like it? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
I do.
I'm telling you guys what's in it, but I'm looking for feedback,
good.
please. The ratepayer, originally wanted to show what part of what we do is we're supposed to show what the impacts are. Enterprise accounts come through as for sewer and water as a ratepayer expense, whereas the airport is paid out of its operations. But the sewer and water are in the process, or will be in the process of doing and projecting rates based on analysis and part of the water company and absorbing Wanacom and absorbing Sconset Water Company and different things. So having a ratepayer number in here for sewer and water is going to be it's going to be too difficult to accomplish at this point. So we'll make a general statement
For us?
for us, for everyone. So we'll make a general statement that that these rates are being reanalyzed and projected, and so at least we're addressing that. We know we need to address them. Thoughts on where we got so far, please? Anyone? Right direction, wrong direction?
I like it.
Upside down
Upside
direction?
down.
Yeah, no, it's good. The garage facility, I still think at town meeting, I think maybe
Rob's, let's just call it Rob's
Rob's,
place.
yeah.
Rob's garage.
I still think something that refers to grounds. I know it says facility,
Yeah.
but there is reworking of the grounds areas, and
Yep.
I just think it has more meat,
Yep.
kind of.
Yep, I gotcha. Campus is weird, but grounds is something
Facilities
that's.
and grounds?
Headquarters?
Actually, they came up with their term. Let me find it again. Sorry.
Yeah, would you mind saying it, and then I'll write
Yeah.
it down?
I sent you the email.
Oh, did you? Thank you.
The principal is.
Grounds is vague
Did I
and
miss-
covers the.
Nantucket DPW Facility Improvement Project.
Yeah, that's better.
All right, that's
We
fine.
were with
What-
Siraj.
Peter, what is it?
Nantucket DPW Facility Improvement Project.
Yeah, that's better.
What about facilities?
I don't think it matters.
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
know what you're thinking now. I
Facility
think
is
that's
all.
better,
Yeah.
if you're trying to sell it.
All right.
It's much better.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds. And so what was it that we just discussed? What was the final? Just incorporating something that references grounds? Is what
No,
our
I
thoughts
think.
are?
Well, that's what they-
I was trying to.
Okay, and that's what you emailed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure we're,
Yeah.
so I'll pick it up later when we discuss it, and it's ultimately, what we put in here is ultimately going to be what you use, because it needs to be represented without creating confusion.
Yeah.
So we're going to need to be consistent. Go
I
ahead,
just,
Lee.
I gotta
to
leave
sell
at 10.
Okay, so
So do
Libby's
I.
got to leave, we all got to leave. Statement of procedures, basically just boil down where we are, what we've been doing. I made a couple modifications to the relational database to clarify that this is something that's expected to be in service for fiscal year 20. And of course, there's other discussions that have to occur and things that have to happen for that to work, but that's the current goal.
Just
Yes,
on
please.
department liaisons, you may want to. I don't know if it would be pertinent to include site that we actually visit the department, site visit, or
Oh,
not.
I did in situ just because it was about like local and on premises,
gotcha,
but it
okay.
also might include like if we were walking around and looking at something like Dave Gray took us out to see
Yeah, I see what you
CCTV
mean.
cameras or something.
Yeah, I
Is
got
that
you.
okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Procedural recommendations. So this is an area where, I've looked at past reports and I've looked at other town reports and I've looked at our FP&P and I've reviewed these with Brian. And they really come out of the idea that having an effective capital improvement plan is essential, and in order for us to manage our capital assets and the acquisitions and construction, that's of equal importance. So these are kind of a distillation of thoughts and other things that are involved with, professional fiscal management objectives, which Nat calls, I put in here, I'm going to take it out, Stevens 20 jobs, according to Nat.
We know what you mean.
Yeah, so I'm not going to necessarily go through each of these unless we want to, we have time, but I wanted to give you an idea. So the funding really ties into, what funding is, that first paragraph is our recognition of circumstances, trying to build in addition some ownership and credibility on a townwide basis by perhaps increasing this amount, but not increasing it arbitrarily, increasing it based on a procedure. And the procedure would be at the bottom of the page, which is, and the title is not something we're married to, but a capital improvement plan capacity and funding study. And what that would be is that through a process that we've already initiated, we'd be getting any reasonable request anticipated, any reasonable expense anticipated in the next 10 years documented. We'd work it all out, put it on paper, make it orderly, and have it reviewed by, obviously through town manager and finance and our group. And then we would send it out to a municipal finance investment type of a consultant. This has happened in the past. The town has done this here in Nantucket not too long ago. That would do some projections on what costs were and maybe some ways to fund it. The final result would not just be their determination, it would be through the finance department. And then based on that, we would be deriving, well, what would be a minimum capital donation? Should it change, and if so, by how much for the next foreseeable future? Currently, it's 1% of the total real estate, personal property taxes, and 1% of the prior year's revenues. So those two relate. I guess I'm going to say this. It should go without, one second. It should go without saying that, any of these changes need to work. We work in a system, and we rely on town manager and finance department and department heads and their availability and scheduling. So, the last sentence, the last paragraph of this on page 10 kind of captures that we're recognizing that we're not just saying these need to be done, or even that we're considering these in a vacuum. Christie?
I was going to ask Brian. I thought it was 3% for capital. 3% of prior. 1%. Has it always been 1?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
What am I thinking of then? All right.
GDP?
Is that your bonus?
Yeah.
Maybe one question before we all go. Where is the BOS with its strategic plan?
We have our second sort of workshop, not next week, but the week after, and then another one scheduled for the beginning of February.
Okay, because I think that's very important, because we could collectively, department heads, this committee could be going down a path that the strategic plan isn't.
Yeah.
And that should be part of our report, maybe not in the report, but it should be in our thought process. Because I know that we, okay.
So, may I?
Yeah, please, absolutely.
So the second paragraph is, for lack of a better word, and not to
Which page you want?
page 9, is a congregational planning.
Yeah.
So basically, it's to get together, congregate for dialogue amongst the town entities responsible for fiscal planning and implementation, which would include initially Board of Selectmen, Capcom, FinCom, Town Manager, and Finance on an annual basis, reviewing to include the results of the capacity and funding study and any fiscally oriented analysis of the strategic plans, the comprehensive plans, facility asset master plans, and then at strategic times to include department heads and other constituents, because there is not only voters who are other constituents, but there are the private sector that can be involved, and interested parties to get input. All the concept would be all to developing and perpetuate an integrated townwide focus on outcomes that matter most as Nantucket's long-term
Good.
goal.
So the other thing I would ask is, does this strategic plan the BOS have a specific title?
Yeah, if you have a reference.
Because I would put it in this paragraph, which is perfect on annual procedure, the specific title of their plan.
Well, not yet, but
Okay.
I assume it would be called something like strategic plan.
When we do, I think, maybe we can say something here, pending a name or something.
I'll get it in reconciliation. And then I know Libby has been away, and I appreciate the fact that, we all need a break, and she didn't pick up any of this stuff yet. She probably may not have even read this text.
I read it last night.
Okay, so, again, I just want to reiterate, some of these are annual procedures, some of them are biennial, but they're not necessarily all like, we're going to institute next year.
Right, and
Fair path.
I was just going to make a couple of very quick comments.
Yep.
CIP capacity and funding study, I don't know if study is the right word.
Okay.
It's more of keeping our overall big picture, keeping our capital improvement plan updated on an annual basis, including funding sources. And we had our financial advisor do this more than once and identify funding sources and what tax rates look like and debt capacity and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I agree, that should be done more regularly than it has been, and it's a matter of getting our resources in order to provide the information.
Sure. Okay, so analysis, capacity and funding analysis.
Maybe something
Or
like
something
that.
like that.
Yeah, just studies seem sort of like not as firm as what it really is.
Okay.
Or meant to be.
Okay, yeah, I got it. And I love this idea of reconciliation. We can sit down and figure these things out before I finalize the report. And were there any others, Libby? At this time?
I just made a little comment to myself on the biennial procedure. Don't we already do this? But it doesn't hurt to mention it.
Okay. And then I just want to point out well, we don't need to get into it. If you guys don't have an issue with stuff, what I'm going to suggest is that we include each of these, and we also talked about the kind of a central management of capital assets, and I'll add that. We talked about that in a private. We talked about that in a previous meeting, and I'll add that which is under the idea of centralized development and implementation of capital asset management. And then I do want to point out that that the text of this will indicate we are considering the following recommendations. And then the last in closing this out is that some of these things are just things that we initiate ourselves. And our next part of our meeting in reviewing out years will include what we do next. And then some of these are things that are going to require that we ask for funding, or we clearly have town manager and finance support and they ask for funding. So there may be some different, there's going to be a little bit of a process in meetings to determine what to do when and how. But this gets them on the forefront, and gets a dialogue going, I think.
Yeah,
is that okay?
Yeah, I just would say that some of these recommendations we're somewhat already doing, some of it. So I just might want to, in some instances, say something like recommend that we continue doing X, Y, Z.
Or
and some of it's
incorporating
not,
Capcom.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it was about, is not that the town isn't doing these, but that the capital program
committee gets more
is involved
Okay.
as part of the SIP.
All right.
That's a good point. Thank
that's
you.
Fine. My only other comment was the very last bullet, adoption of CIP by town meeting. I definitely not quite there yet, because that raises a whole host of other issues about whether or not town meeting can even adopt a plan that's beyond a year.
Yeah.
But there could certainly be a handout, and we talked about this 4 years ago at town meeting, that is the CIP,
Yep.
so that people can see after this year what's in the out years, which might make them better informed voters.
Yes. And so just to round out the thinking on that, and the discussion I had with Brian, was the idea is I think this is like not even a seed, let alone in infancy. At this point in our process as a SIP planning, the Capcom, but it's something that I wanted to put out there, so we're considering how to develop it. It's obviously a double-edged sword. There's obviously utility in some regards, ownership and all the rest of that, but it's way premature. It's not something we're doing or even anticipating doing for a couple of years, I think. Maybe we would do a handout, but maybe not this year.
No,
I don't think.
No.
Yeah. Again, these are just to put them out there so we have, what I'm looking for is, we talked about objectives and goals for the rankings. I know, Matt, I'm trying. I'm trying.
It's all right.
We talked about objectives and goals to get certain things done, and these are kind of objectives and goals for how we're going to proceed with other things we need to do under the financial policies and procedures. We can't do them if we don't identify them, so I'm just trying to get them out there for us to discuss. Now,
All I'm going to say is, what Libby's saying about the SIP at town meeting, I couldn't agree more, because the perception of things. On the other side, to give you an example of something that did an about face in the last couple of years, so you got to be careful how you plan.
Yes.
Planning isn't always going to happen exactly the way you think, even in 2 or 3 years. That harbor master facility building 2 years ago was like not completely agreed on because of other moving parts that could have made that move across the street, finance, all these different questions. This year, because of other decisions, made me, I don't think it was money, I think it was just, is this where we want this? Is this what we really want to do? Versus 2 or 3 years ago where that wasn't decided. If that was in some kind of plan that was this like grandiose plan and it all changed, like, does that make us look like we're not planning? No, I think it makes it look like planning isn't always out years to that level.
Yep.
Sometimes it's tomorrow. It just how things are. And a lot of this stuff is not going to happen. You know what I mean? And some other things are going to happen we haven't even talked about. So I just don't like to get too crazy with it, because every time the selectman changes a little bit, it's like we've never planned anything before. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Libby knows that's true, and I'm not afraid to say it.
But
it's fact.
And now, part
of
the thing is that these relate to one another in an important way.
I know.
No. Let me finish, please.
Well,
let me finish, please.
Okay.
They relate to one another in an important way in like this. The congregational planning allows us to be doing a SIP that we might present to town meeting at some point 3 years from now that's based upon a lot of discussion, just
Yeah.
like the master plan.
Yeah,
So
right.
everybody's bought into it. So that's how they relate, and it's important because you're making good points and they're very
It's
valid.
similar to that, but one of the things that you mentioned about, you didn't say it, but you were thinking debt service stuff.
Yeah.
Brian's really good at that.
Well, I hope
Okay?
so.
No. He's good at explaining.
Yeah, Brian.
No, it's true. You're good at getting to the microphone and kind of saying, okay, this is coming off the books in 2 years. This is coming off the books in 5. This, and all of a sudden, it all makes sense. Instead of just saying we're spending, but people forget we're already buying other stuff, and it's resetting their mortgages. It's like the steamship does the same thing, easy to understand it in layman terms. That has to be part of this
Yes.
thing that you're talking about, this mechanism, because you're selling tax money. Sure. We got to figure out a way to explain that we're already paying for things, we're in good shape, and this is how this revolving sort of funding system happens here, and he's good at explaining that.
Yep.
That's all. I don't think we need to hire anybody. They're already here. It's
Our-
just a question of figuring out the message. All right.
Thank you.
I got to go to work. This is crazy. It's just insane. It's what's going on out there in the real world. Christy knows.
I know it.
It's insane. How's your phone? Melted yet?
Happy to get in there.
I've gotten a few out.
All right, can we get a motion to adjourn?
Next meeting, just next.
Are we meeting
Oh,
again?
sorry.
Wednesday.
Next meeting is
Monday, Tuesday.
10th?
The 10th.
10th. What day is the 10th? Wednesday the 10th at 8 a.m. here.
And that's to just
Finalize the report. You'll get a copy in the
Okay.
email.
Right up.
And the motion. Did we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. Thank you guys for sticking through this with me.
Is the coffee shop open, Jim?
Appreciate it.